This is our preview for the 28th of June, 2021. We call it Who Moved My Cheese because things are really changing for Tesla, and we wanted to cover a few of those data points this week. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters. If you'd like trading ideas and tips, along with daily sort of briefings on things to be mindful of as we head into the trading week, please take time to join us there. So what we wanted to take a look at this week is sort of what's going on with Tesla a little bit from last week, and how does that lead us into the upcoming week in terms of trading/investing. Within 2 weeks of major news for any company, there's something called a quiet period, and we've entered that currently for Tesla, obviously. So we don't expect to hear any major news coming out of the company this week. What we do expect is some upgrades, possibly downgrades from analysts, depending on how their numbers are coming back. Now, you'd have to say that there are 3 zones to consider here of impacting variables. The first zone to consider is, well, what's Bitcoin up to? A sort of let's say 33,000 Bitcoin could definitely spoil the party a bit for Tesla. And so that's something that it seems to have settled down into the $37,000 to $40,000 space currently, especially after Elon announced that a green inclined Bitcoin would be something Tesla would be willing to embrace. The second thing that we wanted to review today is, as a variable impact in the coming week, is something really phenomenal happened last week, which is the market was down 400 in general, the NASDAQ was down 130, and Tesla's stock price actually was up. And I was sort of stunned, amazed, impressed by this. So we're hopeful that sort of the downdraft effect of the markets will moderate, because if the market had been neutral, Tesla would be already over 650 currently, and obviously it did not get there because of that market impact. What do we expect from the market in the coming week? Obviously, anything can happen, including more down. And usually that's what happens, is that you get more down from the market in this circumstance. I would suggest that unless we drop 1,000 or 2,000 on the market / and a comparable amount on the NASDAQ, I would expect that the same upward trend that Tesla has enjoyed towards the end of the week will actually follow through. This further brings up an interesting point, which is that, what are the trends that we're seeing from Tesla? Over the last couple of weeks, we kind of saw a range from 600 to about 625, and that's been maintained until we have, sizable news that might heavily impact the stock. Now, I'd have to say that there's clearly a positive bias on the stock, and the next variable that helps drive our analysis of where things are going is associated with calls and puts, and where the focus seems to be of folks. So the first portion that we'd like to emphasize is what are called the 650 calls and the 650 puts. Currently, if you look those up, and I'm using Yahoo Finance in the category of options, you can look up something called the 650 calls that expire next Friday. And when you look at those calls, you'll see that with the stock price at 623, those calls are selling for $540 a piece. Now, if that's I'd say a decent price in terms of if you consider how volatile the stock is and its potential to move to that number. I thought the most interesting number on the call string for this week is what are called the 650 puts. The reason is that it's the highest numbers of puts and calls anywhere on the option string for Tesla, and there are 30, there are about 8,000 of those puts that are open interest, and they're trading heavily, and their per unit cost is about $3,100 a piece, or if you multiply 3,100 times 8,000, you get about $24 million. On the flip side of that, you actually have the same numbers almost of puts and calls at 650, except for because the calls are $27 out of the money, there's a difference in price on that basis. So if we were strictly to judge what's going to happen this week for Tesla based on do we have more puts or calls, it'd be clear that there are more calls, and therefore, the action would be towards the stock price going down because the market makers want to jam the calls. Right now, I'd have to say that we're in a very, very strange position, because if $24 million has been spent to set up Tesla to sort of fall towards $600 a share, there seems to be a decent size incentive for the market makers to force the stock price down and therefore make a killing in the process. So the argument here would be there are countervailing things going on that drive what we're heading into this week. I would say that I have to lean towards the stock price being down this week, because we don't get the production numbers for the quarter until the following either Monday or Tuesday. And without that information to drive everything, I think it's going to be a very heated week. But if we don't get an upgrade, there isn't enough sort of information to give Tesla a nice 50, 100-point run. That's a real possibility. This all changes, though, if in fact they do get some kind of an upgrade or a downgrade. Could really change how this all plays out. So obviously you can see that the bias towards Tesla stock price has been up for the last couple of weeks. Maybe not a huge amount of dollars. It's sort of stayed stagnant in a certain price range. But it's my belief, based on the fact that the market makers in prior weeks were blocking Tesla in the 625, 630, 635 zone by the fact that there are huge numbers of calls that were sitting there at those price points and encouraging the market makers to try to wipe out those entities. Without that being in place, I really think that we may not reach 650, but I think that's where we're headed for a whole host of reasons driven by the nature of the conversation we just had. So, the one thing I'm keeping my fingers crossed on is that what I think drove the stock price this week was the fact that the general idea of the numbers for Tesla is towards the higher end of range. And in particular, it's my belief that China is now exceeding the production in Fremont, and that this production exceed is going to get more intensive as we go forward, because there's very, very strong demand for the vehicle, and Tesla can't keep up with that demand, and it's running extra shifts to try to do so. So I think the net effect for the week is a fairly positive week. I think we get towards 650, if not above it, but I wouldn't put any variables out there like the market crashing or Bitcoin going negatively crazy in sort of negatively impacting this analysis. I'd say if I were doing options, I would try to get into the week following, because being in an option situation beyond the earnings number, I think would be, or beyond the production number, I think would be extremely prudent. But I think there's a lot of money to be made this week, as with every week when it comes to Tesla. So, we definitely look forward to your input on this, and constructive comments and input is always appreciated. We also wanted to remind you we have a few SpaceX shares. Hit us on the Teslafaninsight Messenger on Facebook in order to engage us in that fashion. We also wanted to encourage you to like and subscribe. We also want to next get into our health tips for the week. Our health tip has sort of gotten stagnant a little bit. We've been getting input from our viewers. I'm just going to review a couple and encourage you to read the rest on our list below this screen. Number one, we wanted to encourage you to consider forest bathing or getting out into nature as a way to improve general health. Core training is something I've been working a lot with and has been working great in terms of strengthening the core muscles and allowing that to reduce back pain. I wanted to slip into an area of cybersecurity that's called privilege escalation. So when you bought your computer, there is different levels that one can impact the machine with. One is called the administrator level, and then there's something called kind of a user level. So what happens in a lot of cyber attacks is the cyber attackers will get into a system at a low-level user and then seek an escalation in privileges, and that escalation allows them to do all kinds of things like freeze up your data, look through that data however they'd like, et cetera. So one recommendation I would make if you're with a small organization, or et cetera, is to carefully guard administrative level access to how those computer systems are controlled, because that's the main way that hackers execute all kinds of wild activities, is the ability to make changes from the administrator level. So I'd highly recommend you consider this. So we want to thank you for taking time out to join us. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss, German, au revoir, French, Lehitro, Hebrew, Choda Hepes, Farsi, Strasuche, Russian, Ni hao ma, Chinese, Konbanwa, Japanese, Namaste, Hindi, Good day, our friends in Australia, Hey Do, our friends in Sweden, and looking forward to bringing on other languages as well. At any rate, this is Greg for Teslafaninsight, and in Jamaica we say, "Nuff respect, walk good man."